Imagine growing up in Baltimore City, a place that can only be described in the 1970s as an open-air drug market. The community is already poverty-stricken, crack vials and needles all over the ground, feelings of being trapped and a sense of undertow pulling you downward. That was my life. To me, it was a horror story that never seemed to end, memorialized by my brother James's tattoo, Many Hard Nights. He said it was the story of our lives. My parents used to fight. At the age of 5, I can remember arguments and loud noises of furniture being tossed around. This caused the separation of my parents. My mother moved us from one project house to the next, and this is how I came to know instability. We would never be anywhere too long, and I can't even tell you how many times we got evicted. I was always a new kid in school. It was difficult for me to make lasting connections. My parents also suffered from drug and alcohol addiction for most of their lives. What I've come to realize is that my parents' addictions were rooted in trauma. Because of my mother's addiction, my brothers and myself were left alone most of the time. I had to figure out how to feed us, and so I would go outside looking for ways to make money. Whether it was going to the supermarket assisting people to carry their bags, or whether it was at the gas station offering to pump someone's gas. I would do whatever I had to do to make sure we did not starve. Sadly for me, I knew nothing of the trials ahead. By the time I was 10, I was immersed in the life of the streets. Needless to say, I could no longer attend school, and eventually I was expelled due to lack of attendance. By the time I was 14, I was selling drugs, doing lookouts, hitting trucks, and hopping trains. For me, it was a matter of survival. I continued to follow the enticements which street life often brings. And on one of these nights, I was approached by a junkie whose head was down with a hood on. And by the time he looked up, he was brandishing a .44 Magnum handgun, which he pointed straight at me and told me I robbed. After giving him everything I had, he began to walk away. He then turned around and started shooting at me. I thought for sure that I would be killed, but by the grace of God, not a single bullet hit me. As scared as I was, that did not last long. I was not deterred, nor was that my retirement. On the fateful night before my arrest, myself and a friend decided to rob another drug dealer. The young man grabbed for the gun, and as we tussled, shots were fired. I was 19 years old, and I was arrested for the attempted murder of a young man whom I had never even met before the incident. I thank God that he did not die from the injuries he sustained. After a 7-day trial before a jury, myself and my co-defendant were convicted and sentenced to 2 concurrent life terms plus an additional 20 years. After being sentenced, I was transferred from the city jail to the Maryland State Penitentiary. I had planned to better myself upon my arrival. I actually got my GED within the first year there, and afterwards enrolled in the Baltimore City Community College pursuing my AA degree. In 1995, my educational pursuits were derailed because they were doing mass transfers due to structural damage within the prison that could not be repaired. We were transferred to a newly opened prison called the Maryland House of Correction Annex. And due to the fact that there was not yet education programs, jobs, or any other pursuits that could help a person keep their mind on the right track, this prison became one of the most violent in Maryland's history. This environment made it impossible for young men such as myself to not get caught up in the chaos that was taking place all around. It was a boiler room for young minds to fester from idle time. And as you know, an idle mind is the workshop of the devil. In 1996, after a huge riot, I was transferred to the Maryland Supermax, where I remained for 5 years. The time I spent in the Supermax became the turning point of my life. I had went in when I was 25, and I did not get released until I was 30. I used the time in solitary to read every book I could get my hands on. The more I read, the more I began to realize the error of my ways. I no longer believed in the lifestyle which I had lived for so long. Through the words that were coming off the pages, unbeknownst to me, my values began to shift. I had lost all interest in being in a gang because to me, the objective no longer made any sense. After 5 years in the Supermax, it became obvious to me that gang life was counterproductive. I told every one of my fellow comrades that I was done and that I would no longer be a part of my own self-destruction. Upon my release from Supermax, the state of Maryland decided that I should be transferred out of state. In 2005, I arrived in Washington State. That same year, I lost my mother, who passed away after a long battle with the HIV virus. I also lost my two younger brothers a few years later to gun violence, and this was devastating to me. Since being in Washington State, I have completed most every course and program offered. I am also a few credits away from obtaining my college degree. In 2021, I started a podcast called The Wall Behind and Beyond. In 2022, I created a nonprofit organization called Inside Outside Consults. I also founded my own consulting business, Philip A. Jones Consulting, LLC. In 2023, I published my first book, Exit to Excellence, which is a reentry workbook, and I am working on my second book called Risk to Resilience, which is a gang prevention manual. I am now on my 33rd year of incarceration and have not allowed this time to prevent me from becoming the man that I want to be. Prison walls may confine my body, but they cannot confine my mind. The work I do now is not only about demonstrating my change, but also to help countless other men and women who find themselves in the same set of circumstances. I tell my story to deter other young people from going down the same path that I did. I hope that if I can change the trajectory of just one life, that I may find redemption, make amends for the wrong I've done, and finally be able to pay my debt to society.